free buses, rent freezing, and city-run grocery stores. These are just 3 of some of the policies that Zoran Mamdani wants to implement if he becomes New York City mayor. And I'm gonna dive into the numbers to see what would happen. Who actually pays for the cost of your bus and the driver when you're riding for free?
People are worried about this. The thing making investors the most nervous, that is the surprising win by Zoran Mamdani.
Business leaders say they'll flee New York City.
My sources, yours, are all freaking out. New Yorkers might leave. They might go to Florida.
I've seen more pause for this event than any event in my 13 years in New York City real estate.
By the way, this is not sponsored by anyone. I have zero skin in the game. I'm not a New York resident, so I can't vote for or against him. I'm just really curious to know how these policies could work. And I'm gonna do my best to look at the pros and cons of each of these 3 policies we're gonna review today in an objective way. So Mamdani says he is a democratic socialist.
Do you like capitalism?
No, I have many critiques of capitalism.
Socialism is a system that promotes social ownership of resources, and it aims to reduce inequality by opposing capitalism and supporting more equitable distribution through public control.
We are ready to have 5 boroughs that New Yorkers can actually afford.
New York City is a city that's built on capitalism, so can socialist policies work? Mamdani lives in Queens. He's born in Uganda and raised in New York. Before politics, he worked as a housing counselor and organizer. He was elected in 2020, defeating a long-time incumbent. He's a smart guy. He saw Trump win the 2024 election based off of campaigning around, hey, things are just too expensive. There is an affordability crisis here, and I'm gonna be the one to fix it. And he built a lot of his momentum on this affordability crisis. So in the US, we saw a 40-year high for inflation after the pandemic. New York City is the country's most expensive city, so people feel it dramatically. Also, if you live in New York, you're paying one of the highest tax rates in the country. So 8 in 10 residents here see living costs as a major problem. 6 in 10 are struggling to cover basic needs. And 85% of New Yorkers reported that the cost of food is rising faster than their income. So Mamdani comes in wanting to lower prices, and immediately you can see the appeal here.
New York is suffering from a crisis, and it's called halalflation.
Halalflation is a term that Mamdani is using to talk about the rising cost of halal food many people know here in New York. He points at inflated permit fees, up to $22,000 a year for street vendors who have to go through a third party to get the license, and higher costs for certified meat and packaging. His goal is to cut red tape and lower these costs so halal food stays affordable for working class and immigrant communities. So the city charges $400 technically for a food vendor permit, but because of artificial scarcity and a resale loophole, vendors often actually have to pay $22,000 just to operate that. And those costs get passed directly on to consumers. And Mamdani goes around New York City with a microphone and actually interviews people here. And this makes him just super relatable, especially to people he is up against who you just don't see doing that. So you can clearly see that Mamdani's strategy here is to mostly talk about the cost of living crisis. So the first question we need to ask is if he's gonna make it cheaper for people to live, well, who is going to be paying those costs?
Our vision to tax the top 1% of New Yorkers, 2% additional.
According to his website, to pay for his affordability plans, Mamdani wants to raise the corporate tax rate to 11.5%, which he says would bring in an extra $5 billion. He's also proposing a flat 2% tax on the top 1% of earners in New York, which he calls a rounding error for the rich. So he has a plan to finance these programs by essentially raising taxes, which is why Wall Street and just really rich people are sort of freaking out here. Mamdani wants New York City to operate its own grocery stores. Not just one, but 5 nonprofit city-owned markets, one in each borough. His argument, private grocery stores have left huge parts of New York City, especially public housing areas with high prices and almost no healthy food options. So the thought here is that if corporations won't serve these communities, the city should step in. Over 66% of New Yorkers actually support this idea across party lines. We've also seen this tried before in cities like Memphis, Atlanta, even Baldwin, Florida. Local governments open grocery stores to fill the gaps left by big retail chains. Chicago's mayor is pushing for city-owned grocery stores after a major study found the plan necessary and doable. So the big pro is simple. The city steps in when private businesses won't. In places like Chicago's South and West Sides, major chains like Aldi and Whole Foods have actually shut down because of underperformance. So city leaders are exploring publicly owned stores that focus on access over profit. Now, a recent Chicago study estimated that it would cost about $26 million to build 3 stores, and the city could cover rent, utilities, and even losses. The goal here, remember, is to ensure fresh food is a right, not a luxury. But here's the flip side. Grocery stores already run on super thin margins. I'm talking about
1 to 3%. They survive themselves because of buying huge volumes.
Cities starting from scratch don't have those relationships or that scale to compete. So critics here worry about the inefficiency, political mismanagement, and whether taxpayers should actually be liable if things don't work out. We actually saw this play out in Baldwin, Florida, where the city opened its own grocery store in 2018 after the last private one closed. It worked for a few years until it didn't, and by 2023, it was operating at a loss. New York City is facing a massive housing affordability crisis. 1 in 3 people here pay more than half of their income just on rent. Meanwhile, rents have surged over 30% since 2020, far outpacing wage growth.
2 out of every 3 New Yorkers rent their home. They don't own, they pay rent.
Mamdani says rents are too high and hurting people while landlords are still making money. In Manhattan, the average rent was over $5,000 a month in 2024. So a temporary rent freeze gives working class New Yorkers much needed breathing room. It helps prevent mass displacement, homelessness, and further gentrification, especially in communities already under economic distress. He says it's not about punishing landlords, it's about pausing rent hikes while broader housing reforms are debated. Now, past mayors like Bill de Blasio froze rents multiple times, and if the city can freeze rents during a pandemic, why not during a housing emergency? But not everyone agrees. Some say freezing rent might cause problems later on. Landlords might not want to fix or improve their building if they can't raise rent, and costs like insurance, property taxes, and utility bills keep going up. Landlords had to pay about 8% more last year, so if rents are frozen, the same landlords might not be able to pay their bills and buildings could get run down. And most rent-stabilized apartments are over 50 years old, so this is a real concern. Another problem here is that freezing rent might scare away people who want to build new apartments, and that would make apartments even harder to find, which could make rents for other apartments go up even more, and this could hurt the very people that rent freeze is trying to help.
So Mamdani says that the rent freeze is not forever, it's just for now.
But with New York already having a shortage of apartments and old buildings needing repairs, some worry this idea is just a short-term fix that could cause bigger problems later on.
The final topic we'll go over today is Mamdani wants to make buses totally free to help people get to work without having to pay to get to work. Right now, a bus fare costs $2.90 in New York.
So making buses free could help people save money, especially those who don't have a lot of it.
So hold on, why buses and not the subway, for example?
The subway system is huge and very expensive to fix. The city spends billions on subway repairs every year. Making the subway free would cost way more money. Buses run on the streets and reach places where the subway doesn't go, which means free buses are a more affordable way to help people more quickly. Now, some cities in the US have already tried free buses. In Kansas City, Missouri, buses became free in 2019. And since then, bus ridership went up about 15% in the first year. More people started taking the bus instead of driving. Use the free bus system every week.
But there are some concerns here. Running buses costs a lot of money.
In New York, the MTA spends about $2.7 billion a year on bus operations.
He clearly campaigned on things that he can't govern, like making buses free.
Right now, about 12% of that money comes from fares. If buses are free, the city or state has to pay all of it and probably will do so by raising taxes or cutting other services.
Another concern is that buses might get too crowded.
When Kansas City made buses free, they got busier and sometimes more crowded, so the city had to add more buses and drivers. Some people also worry that buses could become less safe or dirty without fares, but Kansas City did not see safety problems after going free. Another thing here is that if buses become free, maybe people will choose bus over subway, and that could be a problem because the subway is already losing a lot of money right now and struggling to pay for repairs. So losing subway riders means losing more money, which could make fixing the subway even harder. So while free buses could help lots of New Yorkers save money and get around easier, it costs a lot and could cause problems like crowding and less revenue.
Okay, but I want to know what you think in the comments below. There's a lot of interesting ideas here, things that we haven't seen mayors do before, especially in a city like New York City. So knowing what we know about the pros and cons of some of these economic policies, what do you think? Are these good ideas? Should these be implemented across New York City and other cities around the US? And what other things are you thinking about in terms of how a mayor and a city should be run in terms of economics here? While you're at it, check out more of my videos about tech, money, and you can help support this channel by hitting that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.